All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Open Education Week. We're happy that you decided to join us for our first session this week. My name is Erin Maney, and I'm the Manager of Communications and Community Engagement at SUNY Online. And it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker today and welcome you to this webinar. We're pleased to host Dr. Stephanie Foote from Stony Brook University to share about incorporating online engagement elements to enhance reflection. Dr. Foote is the Associate Vice President for Teaching and Learning and Evidence-Based Practices, and she has taught in the Higher Education Administration program for Stony Brook since 2013. And her scholarship and consultative work span a variety of aspects of student development and transition, including the role of first-year seminars, experiential pedagogy on student engagement in the early college experience, the community college transfer student transition, self-authorship development, engagement and learning in online environments, which we'll hear about today, faculty development, metacognitive teaching and learning approaches, and high-impact educational practices. So welcome, Dr. Foote. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I appreciate it. And thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm so grateful to have this time with you all, and thank you for making time in your day for this session. So as Erin mentioned, our focus is on looking at some ways in which we can enhance online engagement. So the title of the session is Utilizing Elements of Online Engagement as a Strategy for Reflection. And Erin has posted in the chat a link to the resource booklet that I've created for you all. It includes a copy of the slides as well as some of the other articles and references to which I will refer in the session. So please make use of that. So here's some goals for our short session today. I hope that we will take some time to learn from and with each other. I'm excited to learn from you all, to reflect on our practices that we currently engage in as online and/or blended instructors, and to share as we're comfortable. I know sometimes in environments like this, it can be a little awkward, but then sometimes it can also be a little bit liberating too, to be able to share with new folks. At the end of the session, hopefully you'll be able to see some opportunity that you might have in your own professional practice to take some of the strategies that I'll be sharing and apply them. And I think that hopefully you'll be inspired, as I was when I first became familiar with the different forms of online engagement, as I began to think about, how I design and deliver my own online courses. So hopefully you'll feel similarly. The QR code on the right hand side of the screen also links to the resource booklet. So feel free to use that if you would prefer, or use the link in the chat. So I want to go ahead and get started. And as we go through the information that I prepared, I welcome your feedback and your questions. And we're a small group, so feel free to put your questions in the chat or unmute yourself, and I'll be very happy to answer them on the spot. Whatever it is that you're wondering about is more important even than what I've prepared to say. So feel free to interrupt at any time, and I would be very happy to hear from you and answer any questions, so we don't have to save them all until the end. So we're going to start with thinking a little bit about reflection in online teaching. And I would imagine that probably everyone in this room or everyone watching the recording has engaged in some sort of reflection about their teaching practice. But I think that what I realized from my own experience teaching online for so long is that while I do a lot of reflection, I reflect in the moment and I reflect afterwards, I don't always use a structure to reflect. And so I sort of sought out some opportunities to engage in a more structured reflection, and that's what I'm going to share a little bit more about in just a moment. So first of all, again, I think probably everyone is already doing this, so I probably don't have to convince you that reflection is important in online teaching. However, hopefully I can inspire you to think about reflecting periodically and again in a more structured way. So this passage includes a few different important ideas, things that really struck me. So when I think about why reflection is important in my online teaching practice, it's important to think deeply about our practice, to engage in reflection that includes getting feedback from lots of different stakeholders. So those obviously are our students, but also other colleagues, which, is a little bit different in an online teaching environment, especially if you're teaching asynchronously, like I generally teach asynchronously, but you still can get feedback from colleagues. But it's a little bit different overall, a bit of a different process. So without the structure or framework to guide our reflection, we run the risk of quote unquote affirming existing beliefs rather than engaging in the confrontation and examination of the beliefs, which I really love this part of the quote, is like reflecting in a hall of mirrors. So for me, it really struck me as I was thinking about my own teaching practices and how I might grow as an online instructor, thinking about how I can be more structured and intentional about the ways in which I engage in reflection. So first of all, I had to find some frameworks, and I have a few now that I use and that I've adopted so I can engage in more reflection in action. So I'm doing a lot more in the moment, reflecting, and then also adjusting my teaching practices based on what I'm learning. So there are a lot of different forms of reflection, but I chose today to talk a bit about guided reflection. And guided reflection, as we think about the online engagement framework and the elements that I'll introduce you to in just a few minutes, fits very well because there are questions that I've created that are associated with each of the elements in the framework. And we can use those questions to guide us as we're thinking through the ways in which we engage our students in our courses. So it helps to have some sort of guided reflection because we're thinking very specifically and we're also collecting information that responds to, so it helps us understand really what's happening instead of just going from our gut. So guided reflection is a process where we're engaging in reflective practice in a very structured and systematic way. So I mentioned before that as an online instructor, and I imagine this is the case for many of you, you're reflecting in the moment, you're reflecting after the semester ends, but we don't always allow enough time and space to reflect fully, to collect evidence, and then to do something about it. We often don't have the luxury of having the time and space. As Erin shared the introduction, my introduction at the beginning of this session, I work full time, like probably many of you all do, and teach part time as well. So the time that I have in terms of my own courses is quite limited, and I teach every semester. But what I've done over the last couple of years is to try to create time and space where I can be very intentional, both in the moment and afterwards, using the practices that I'm sharing here with you all. So it also helps us to develop our own awareness. When we engage in guided reflection, it's a form of self-regulation. So if you have ever learned about self-regulated learning, or have taught students about how to be self-regulated learners, we're helping them to be more aware of the gaps in their own learning and to be filling those gaps with information. So seeking resources and information to help fill the gaps so they can be more effective in terms of their own learning process. And the same is true with our teaching practice. I found myself that when I'm reflecting in the moment, I am practicing self-regulation. So if there are areas where I can improve, I don't want to save them all until next semester when I may forget about some of these things. I need to think in the moment about how I can be responsive and prioritize that. So the framework that I'm going to share with you all next, that I have reflected on in terms of using the online engagement framework and applying it, is a model of reflection that I wasn't familiar with until I started doing some research, and it's called John's model of reflection. It's a very simple model, and I chose it because it lends itself to the integration of the questions that I developed around the online engagement elements in the framework, which I'll share with you in just a few moments. So again, this framework was very new to me, but it's not unlike other models of reflection. I like this one because it's very simple. So in John's model of reflection, we start, in this process where we're describing our experience. So what is it that's happening in the moment? And we're reflecting deeply about that. So is this good? Is this bad? What's contributing to this? What are some of the influencing factors? What could I have dealt with or done better? So gathering evidence that helps us to understand. And sometimes, probably as instructors, you feel like things have not gone well, but, upon further reflection and gathering evidence, like gathering feedback from students, it's not always necessarily a teaching fail, but there are a lot of opportunities to learn and to grow. And then there's a learning process. So that's where we're trying to fill in the gaps, within our own knowledge. We're trying to think about ways in which we could do things a little bit differently. How could we tweak? How could we, incorporate new information, new ideas, the next time we go through this process. So there are things that we can do in the moment, And then there are things that we can do sort of longer term. So when I get to the learning part, I'm always thinking about, the learning that I can apply now and some of the learning that I might want to apply later on. So I use this framework to take this other framework, the online engagement framework, and the elements of it, and actually go through an active process myself where I was reflecting on and making some changes to my online courses. And the idea here is that the online engagement framework helped me to think through a problem that I was experiencing in some of my courses, where I felt like students weren't fully engaged. And maybe when they were, I wasn't necessarily tapping into all of the different aspects of engagement. In an online learning environment, engagement often shows up through discussion board posts and through assignments and activities in the course. And so I wanted to think a little bit differently about engagement and honor all of the different forms of engagement. And that's when I came across the online engagement framework. And then I applied John's model to begin to think about how actively I can incorporate this into my teaching practice. So I want to introduce you to the different elements of the online engagement framework. And in the resource wakelet that I've shared with you all, there's a handout that describes each of the elements and gives you the questions that I'm going to share with you. So if you wanted to, you can go through this guided reflection process using those questions. So thinking about how each of these forms of engagement shows up in your courses and how you're designing intentionally. And thank you, Erin, for reposting the link to the wakelet. So that's the idea here. Also, the article from which the framework is derived, it's written by Redmond et al., and I think it was published in 2018, is linked in the resource wakelet as well. It's an open online publication, so you can see that. And then also you can see a couple of articles that we've written since that original framework was published. So this is the online engagement framework, again, from the Redmond et al. Article published in 2018. And you can see it's simple, but it was really powerful for me as I found this and began to think about ways in which I could improve my own teaching practice in my online courses. Because again, I was thinking about how engagement shows up, how I design for engagement, what it looks like in the online environment versus a face-to-face or on-ground experience, or what it looks like, in a blended environment versus online or an on-ground experience. So I felt like I had some opportunity to grow in terms of my own course design and delivery as I thought about this expanded definition of engagement. So I'll explain what each of these mean, and there's some explanation in the handout that I've created and then also in the article. But just for now, know that there are 5 elements of engagement. The first one is social engagement, then there's cognitive engagement, behavioral engagement, which sometimes shows up in these materials with a U because the team that worked on this is Australian, collaborative engagement, and emotional engagement. So the next several slides will introduce the online engagement framework elements, so each of the elements, and then the reflective questions. But before I launch into these, I want to see if there are any questions or comments about the information that I've shared so far.
Anyone can feel free to unmute or type in the chat if you do have questions so far. I'm not seeing any yet, though.
Nope. Might still be too early. Both in terms of time and time in the presentation. All right,
I'll
well,
alert you if I see any, though. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Erin. So the first element, the online engagement framework element of social engagement, is true to its name. I mean, this is an opportunity for students to make connections to each other and a little bit to the instructor, but also, to each other. So there's this social aspect of it. So in terms of reflective questions, as I thought about the social engagement element, I'm thinking through questions like, how is my course designed to build a sense of community? Because I really want all of my students to feel as though they belong in the course and also feel connected to each other and connected to me. And because the courses that I teach in the higher ed administration program at Stony Brook are often the first classes that the students will take, their introductory courses. I want them to feel connected to the program. So one of the things that I did was I created a LinkedIn group. So this is outside of, Brightspace, but I linked to it in Brightspace. But I wanted students to feel connected right away with each other and with others who have graduated from the program. And I also created a wisdom wall. So I've invited students who, at the end of my course, who have feedback that they'd like to share, advice that they want to share, not only about the course, but about the program. And I put that together into a wisdom wall, and I update it every single semester. And I share that with students before the class even begins, because I want them to feel as though they have everything they need to be successful. They will have everything they need to be successful. And also they can start forming a sense of community. They feel community with each other and also with others who have taken this class before. There's some camaraderie and unity that happens in that regard. I'm also looking for different aspects of my course that foster belonging. Often I teach, well, every semester I teach a student development theory class. So one of the goals that I have for the course is for students to be able to see the usefulness, the utility of the theories in their own professional practice. And so to do that, I have to first help them see themselves in these theories as well, and to understand and apply that to their own developmental journeys. So I'm looking at opportunities like, in the early part of the course, I've designed journal assignments. So students are reflecting on their developmental journey. They revisit that journal later on in the semester through a theoretical perspective. So I'm looking at specific aspects of the course that help students to feel like they belong. And often students tell me that assignments like that really help them to feel a sense of belonging and also a connection to the material that they're studying. I also want to be careful that I'm collecting evidence that helps me to understand whether or not students are feeling that sense. So I do a couple of quick check-ins with them. I have anonymous surveys and I have an open course reflection. I open it up before the class starts, so at any point they can offer feedback, but then I do a couple of quick check-ins just to find out how they're feeling and how connected they're feeling to each other and to the course itself. There's a lot that I do to try to establish trust. This can be very tricky in an online asynchronous environment, for example. It's hard to know whether or not the students actually feel a sense of trust. But I have to assume, based on the evidence I'm collecting, this some of this is making a difference in terms of the feelings of trust. But I have a liquid syllabus that I created several years ago now that I update every semester, that I send out before the class begins. And in it, I introduce myself and I introduce the course, and I talk about why I love teaching this course and why this course wasn't naturally something that I ever wanted to teach. I struggled mightily with theory when I was first introduced to it as a graduate student because I didn't feel connected to it. So that really has influenced my perspective. And I peel back the curtains, open the curtains and explain all of that to them. And I think that that's very important, in terms of developing trust. I also communicate with them about the expectations of the course and about how we prioritize them as humans first. And I think that this is very important. It's in my syllabus and it's also in my liquid syllabus too. It's all about like teaching and learning in the current moment. And it started off during the pandemic. I wrote a statement about, teaching and learning during the pandemic because I wanted them to know at any point if they weren't well and they just needed to, take a pause, that it would be okay, that they could let me know we have to prioritize our health and our well-being. And that statement has evolved. And I feel like it still has a place now, in the current iteration to be part of the course. And students tell me that it does help them feel a sense of trust and they feel like I'm there for them. Even though this is an asynchronous online class, they still feel a sense of presence and support through that statement and through the liquid syllabus. In an online learning environment, cognitive engagement is usually the form of engagement that we see the most, I think, at least from my experience teaching online and evaluating online courses. So I think that, for this one, we have it probably pretty well covered. But, for myself, I feel like I'm still learning the balance and the ways in which, I can engage students cognitively, um, in different ways too, and not just asking them to provide discussion board posts, but really to engage with the material in different ways. So cognitive engagement, is helping the students to apply their learning and to demonstrate that learning. And so I'm looking at the different content and tasks in my course that are engaging students in critical thinking in particular, because I want them to be thinking deeply and making connections, again, to the information in my courses. How do I introduce them to critical thinking, is something that I'm thinking about. And I do that, again, through the liquid syllabus and in the beginning of the course, introducing them to how they can approach these theories. So teaching them how they can read about them and learn about them. And in some ways, it's liberating because many of them come into the course thinking they have to memorize everything, which is why I didn't like theory in my field when I first started, because that's exactly what I had to do. I had note cards with all the theories and theorists on them because I had to take an exam. It was a qualifying exam in order to complete my master's degree. And so it was really arduous. It was quite an undertaking to learn about all the theories and theorists. And I just found myself memorizing. And I tell my students from day one, that's not at all what you need to do here. I'm not going to test you on these. What I want you to do, though, is to demonstrate that you are thinking critically about the theories and about the application of theory. And really, that's what this course is all about. It's applying theory to practice. And even if you haven't practiced in our field yet, if that's just what you're aspiring to do, I still want you to be thinking from your own perspective, having been a student, what that would look like. So I'm inviting them, but also liberating them from this idea that theory has to be used in this way, or you have to memorize it and learn it in this particular format. And then I'm looking at ways that I can introduce them to or activate their sense of metacognition. So how is it that I'm engaging them in metacognitive teaching and learning practices? So some of the ways that I'm doing that, again, to invite them to think about how something is good in their own context. So how can I apply this? How does it work? What does it, apply to in my own personal developmental journey? Those are all ways, that sort of deep reflection, that can help them to activate their metacognition. So they're learning more deeply and in a more integrative way, which ultimately is what I want them to be able to do instead of regurgitating a theory and theorist. I'm also looking again at opportunities to integrate ideas. So as we move throughout the semester, the assignments are becoming progressively more advanced, and I'm looking for them to bring in multiple theories. So for example, my students right now are working on a theory to practice paper where they're bringing in a couple of different types of theories and applying those to some of the existing professional practices to solve a challenge in higher education. So I'm giving them an opportunity to kind of bring all of this together. And at the same time, they're justifying their decision by telling me how these theories apply to the practice that they're looking at and how that's responding to a particular challenge or need in higher education. And all throughout, I'm hoping that we're making connections within our discipline. For anyone in higher education, they're not necessarily, none of us have gone to undergrad and studied higher education administration in the program that I teach in, but they're developing this knowledge and expertise at the master's level. So it's a beautiful sort of interdisciplinary kind of experience. And I'm hoping that they're developing those deep understandings that are connected to this discipline that we share together. And then hopefully that will help them moving forward. So they're making connections to, other courses that they've taken or thinking about how they connect to future courses, including the capstone course where they do some research on their own. I'm going to go ahead and pause here. I still have 3 more elements to talk about, but let me see if there are any questions about the first 2 elements.
Stephanie, I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, so far, I see a lot of alignment to the community of inquiry model, right?
Yes,
And a lot
yes,
of overlap there from that. And I know a lot of the work that we do here in SUNY Online is really, out of and from that kind of model. I'm interested to see when you get to the, I think it was collaborative engagement, how
yeah.
that's different from social engagement. That was my first thought when I saw the slide was, how are those two different? So.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And it is, there's a lot of overlap with the community of inquiry framework. What I love about the online engagement framework is that it goes just a little bit deeper, and I found it a little easier in terms of, my own reflective practice. So it kind of pushed me to go further, with the different forms of engagement. But, I think the two of them combined are pretty awesome. There's definitely a lot of influence. So emotional engagement, this, has to do with the students' attitudes and feelings about learning. And I'll tell you again, using the student development theory course that I teach, a lot of my students tell me that they come into the course feeling very nervous about it because they've not taken psychology ever, or if they have, it was a very long time ago. And they're very nervous because they think that it's going to be like that, or it's going to be just intimidating for them because theory is not their thing. They just don't like to memorize and regurgitate. And, again, I tell them from the very beginning that that's not the intent. That's not how this course is designed. That's not how you're going to show me that you really understand the information in the course. That's not really our objective here. So from the very beginning, as I shared, in the liquid syllabus, I'm communicating expectations, but I'm communicating not only the expectations that I have for them, but the expectations that they can have for me, which I think also kind of changes how they see themselves as learners, because I describe myself, the instructor, as somebody who knows a lot about this, but I'm also a work in progress. I'm also learning um, from them as well. And, I want them to know that I'm still, growing and learning too. So I'm communicating the expectations and hopefully managing some of that from the beginning. But, throughout the semester, I'm reminding them, remember what our objective is here. We're not memorizing again, we're applying, which is, that's pretty deep learning. But, if you continue to reflect and engage in all of these different learning activities, you can do it. And I'm giving them a lot of positive feedback along the way, and also revealing, some of the challenges that I see too, and applying some of these theories. Acknowledging that some of them are limited, in terms of their scope, some are a little bit outdated and they need to be expanded. And I think that that's also very important too, because I don't want them to think that these are absolutes. These are things that need to be revisited and applied, and they should be thinking about that too and challenging a lot of what they're learning. And I think that that helps to manage expectations as well. I'm asking them to, make connections again to their own learning journeys and developmental journeys, and that helps to connect to some personal motivation too, like as they begin to reflect on and use what they're learning to understand themselves, and then projecting that on their current professional practice or in the future. So thinking about, what can I do now? And then what can I do later on to continue this learning process, to continue to reflect and apply the theories? And then what am I prepared to do moving forward to continue to grow and learn as well? And that can be really powerful for them. And I've shared with them a bit about how I have done that over my professional career too. And next is behavioral engagement. And I mentioned sometimes it shows up with the U because the team is Australian. But behavioral engagement has to do with communicating the norms and rules, quote unquote, within the online learning environment, how to guide their engagement in this environment so that they know exactly what would be appropriate, especially for those who are new to online learning. And I think I'm still surprised every semester to learn that, so many of my students still haven't taken online courses, and these are students who have gone to school during the pandemic and post-pandemic, and many of them are still new to online, really and truly new to online learning. But even for those who are familiar with it, each of us takes a very different approach in terms of our course design and delivery. So there's a learning curve there. And so I feel like it's always important to help students understand how they can be successful in the course. And some of the ways that I do that, again, through the liquid syllabus, beginning the semester by helping them to understand clearly what the expectations are. And I use a framework called Transparency in Learning and Teaching, or TILT. And I think I may have linked to some information to it in the Wakelet, but if I haven't, I'll make sure it gets there. I use this framework to help them in terms of thinking about the expectations of the course and to think about how they can be successful in it. So for each of the assignments, I have clearly in my liquid syllabus and also in Brightspace, the task, purpose, and criteria for success. So that's sort of the tilt framework that I apply. So I'm thinking about, like, for each of those, reducing what I'm asking them to do into a couple of sentences. So I'm being very clear about what I'm asking you to do and what is the purpose of this and how does it connect to the other things in the course or in the program. And then the criteria for success usually is clearly, just a little information and then linked to a rubric that provides them with some more specific grading information. So I'm looking at ways in which, in terms of my behavioral engagement, in addition to that, how can I help students develop academic skills? So the ways that I do that, I've shared some already, helping them to be more reflective so that that skill of reflection is important, helping them to know how and where to navigate within the course. In my course that I teach and all the courses that I teach in the HEA program, it's important for students to develop the skills around citation, appropriate citation. And if they're using, for example, AI, then they need to know how to cite that appropriately and how to provide some documentation. So in my course, because again, the courses that I teach are often taken in the first semester, some of them are taken a little later, but I'm always teaching students who are in the beginning of the program. I'm helping them to develop some of those essential skills. So I provide them with a lot of APA information. I have resources that I've curated. We have lots of great resources through Stony Brook, but there are also others out there. So I put those together into collections that I make available in Brightspace and also in the liquid syllabus. I'm also actively always trying to help students to identify some of the challenges that they have and to anticipate those in the moment. So if they expect that they may have challenges completing an assignment, I'm usually very flexible and accommodating to the extent that I can be, and helping them to develop agency so they feel like they can be responsible themselves, and take on the responsibility as a learner. So they're not waiting for me, but they're actively engaging. And I help them to do that through a number of different ways. But one of the keystone assignments that I have in most of my classes is discussion leader assignments. And many of you may have that as well, where the students, sign up for a topic and then they help to lead discussion during that given week in which the topic is discussed. And I think that, I was just meeting with a student last week who had taken my course a couple of semesters ago, and she told me that that was really a pivotal experience for her. She was a little scared of it to begin with because she felt like she would not have the expertise that she needed to lead the discussion. But after working together with me, back and forth, over a period of 4 days, refining her questions, she felt very comfortable. And she said that it was really amazing. She felt like, I really understand the information and I can respond to my peers, and I'm really like fully engaged in this. So I felt like that was a really good experience in terms of, helping a student to develop some agency. I'm also thinking about, how can I communicate the norms and expectations, and how can I help them in terms of the learning design, to make it more easy to navigate so they are not struggling, to figure out what it is that I'm expecting or where things are located. Again, we all have sort of different approaches, but I try as much as possible to make it very clear. In my liquid syllabus, I have a video and also some screenshots that walk them through like how and where to find everything. What does a module look like each week? What does it include? And, how do I expect you to kind of navigate through that? And then the peer support and encouragement comes a lot through the discussion leader assignment, but there are a few other ways that it shows up in my courses, but that's certainly the strongest sense of peer encouragement. I think because every student goes through that experience during the semester, they feel very supportive and engaged with each other, which I love to see. There's a lot of encouragement and support that goes on in those discussion leader-led discussion boards. The next online engagement framework element is collaborative engagement. And Erin asked a question earlier, said she was interested in learning about the differences between social engagement, collaborative engagement. So social engagement, the ways in which I envision it are more about developing relationships and not necessarily relationships with each other around the material. So the collaborative engagement is more about learning from and with peers. So there's still somewhat of a social aspect to it, but at the same time, it's around the activities and assignment, the content in the courses. So in an online learning environment that's asynchronous, obviously this can be a little bit tricky, as we all know. Group work can be tricky in any course. But in my courses, I'm thinking through different ways in which I can provide them opportunities to learn from and with each other. I mentioned the discussion leader-led discussion boards, but I'm also providing them with options to complete some assignments together if they want to, but they don't have to. So I have in some of my courses, not the student development theory course, but some of the other courses that I teach, potential collaborative assignments, and they can opt in if they want to, or they can complete them on their own. So that's an option for them if they're interested. I also help them to set up study groups, like virtual study groups, in all of my courses. So it's a way for them to interact a bit socially, but also academically around the content. And students have said that that's very helpful too. Sometimes they start to reach out and connect and form those groups on their own, but it doesn't always happen naturally in my courses, especially in the HEA 502 class, the student development theory class I teach, because they just don't know each other. They're brand new to the program. So helping to facilitate that can really go a long way. I mentioned some of the ways in which I help humanize myself too to my students, sharing a bit about myself, which I know a lot of us do as online instructors, and about my connection to the course. Also can help them to, begin to relate more to me and to the course. I have weekly update videos that are unscripted that I film and post every Monday. And students, I try to also incorporate like some, things that are happening in my life. Like tomorrow is my daughter's birthday. She's turning 6. So in this week's weekly update video, I mentioned some of the fun things we did over the weekend, and then also how far behind I am on everything because we did the fun things over the weekend. But I think that it helps to make a connection and strengthens the relationship. But then I also, develop the relationship around the content as well. So again, showing the connections that, that I see in the content and helping them to develop some relationship to that as well. I mentioned the LinkedIn group that I have, and I think, it was something that just came to mind one day, and I didn't think it would really turn into much of anything, but it has. It's really been a great way for students to connect to each other and to form a more professional network with each other. So it's a little bit, less ad hoc than some of the other things that I've created to help them make connections with each other, like in the social element. But this is a little bit more, there's some intentionality behind it. I try to post, opportunities like job opportunities, professional learning and development opportunities, and I invite them to do the same. And it's been a really fruitful place. It's also been a great place for like encouragement and positivity, as people are applying for doctoral programs and as they're, going on into new professions or new jobs or moving across the country. It's been a really cool place. I also make sure to highlight some of the good stuff that's happening at Stony Brook too. So there are institutional opportunities and things that I can share with them in that space as well. And now I've gone through all the online engagement framework elements. I've shared with you some of the reflective questions. I use those reflective questions again to go through this more intentional process in my own teaching practice. So to use John's model to have a more guided reflective process. And I would love to hear from you all about questions, thoughts, reactions that you have to the framework, to the questions, to the elements themselves, to things that you're doing, like sharing some of the things that you're doing that maybe we could all benefit from that kind of fit within this broader framework. Oh, Christopher put a question in the chat. I love it. Do the LinkedIn spaces continue to grow after the course? Yes. So I have one LinkedIn space. I debated about whether I would have a space for every class. I teach this 502 class every semester. So fall, summer, and spring. And then I have a different winter term class, and then I sometimes teach some other courses during the different semesters. But I decided that it would just probably make sense to have one. So it's one big class, but a lot of the students know each other because higher ed is kind of a small field. It's big, but it's small. So it's great because they're connected to all of the students who've taken the course over the last couple of years. I think I've had the LinkedIn group now for like 2.5, almost 3 years. So it does continue to grow. And the students, it's taken on a life of its own too. Like I don't have to post as much because the students are posting quite frequently. And, it's just a great space. And it's so easy. There isn't really anything that we have to do other than post there occasionally and, you know, offer encouragement and support. It's pretty cool. Any other questions or ideas?
Hi, Stephanie. This is Erica from Alfred State.
Hey,
I
Erica.
a few comments. I took so much from this already. Could you talk a little bit more about your liquid syllabus and sort
Oh,
of what
sure.
that looks like? And then a second question. When you're talking about the reflection, how because you mentioned the time for this is really one of those things that I feel like sometimes I get through the semester and I have all of these notes saved of things that I wanted to do, didn't get to, or will try to
Yeah.
remember for the next semester. Could you talk a little bit about how you really make time for this throughout, your semester?
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for those questions, Erica. So I'll stop the share too. Okay. I'll post some liquid syllabus information in the Wakelet, the resource Wakelet. But the liquid syllabus, the idea was, and it's not my original idea, it came from the person that attribute it to rather, is Michelle Pacansky-Brock. She is a visionary in terms of like online student engagement and humanizing online courses. So I got this idea from her several years ago during the pandemic. I was trying to think about how I could create a more humanized online learning environment in my courses, particularly again, given the asynchronous format and of course everything that was happening in the world. So the idea with my liquid syllabus is I create a Google site. So we use Google at Stony Brook. I create a Google site, and the reason that I create a Google site is because it's accessible to students before they have access to my course in Brightspace. So basically, it is a Google site where they have the video again that I introduce myself and talk about the course and my connection to the course. I have a copy of the actual syllabus there embedded in the liquid syllabus. I have a page on expectations, my expectations, their expectations. I have information about APA because I know that that's something up front that they struggle with. I have the screenshots of the modules and links to the videos so they know what to expect when they do get into Brightspace, so they're not overwhelmed by that. And I tell them, when you do get into Brightspace for the first time, have this open on the side too, if you can, along with your browser looking at Brightspace. But the other reason that I created it in Google Sites is because I know that students are not always sitting at a computer accessing the course information. And so this is accessible to them. Oh, and thank you, Erin posted some of Michelle Pacansky-Brock's information online, her online humanizing information. Thank you. So if I created it in Google Sites because it was accessible on different devices and it wasn't something that, again, they had to be connected to Brightspace. So if they were just becoming a student, at the university, or if they had not yet gotten access to Brightspace, they could access all of this. Once my course starts, the liquid syllabus lives in the Start Here area in Brightspace. So that's where it's housed. And so students can keep coming back to it. And because it has APA information in it, they often do go back to it and they have access to it forever and ever, even after the course ends. So when they no longer have access to my course in Brightspace, they still have access to the liquid syllabus because I don't delete any of them. So that's also another advantage to having something that students can externally that they can get to, but that we can embed as well within the context of our courses. So in terms of reflection, it is very tricky and difficult sometimes to find the time in the moment. The courses that I teach at Stony Brook are 10 weeks, all of them. So there is a period after the semester ends when I plan to make the most significant revisions. So I give myself a break, a little break, and then I work on revising for the next time I'm teaching the course. I do, though, try to find some time during each week. I have sort of a schedule for myself, so I'm in my course every single day. But, I also am doing like maintenance things on particular days, like usually Sunday is a maintenance day for me. Saturday is generally a lighter day where I'm just, checking discussion boards and doing some posting. So a little bit over the weekend. And then one day during the week, I'm looking at and reflecting more intentionally. So for me, it's usually Friday. Friday at the end of the day is when, I've tried to carve out a little bit of time. But again, it's very, very tricky to do that. But at that point, on Friday afternoon, I'm planning for the next week. I'm thinking about what I need to do in terms of maintenance, but I'm also reflecting on some of the bigger things that I need to make some changes to. I'm thinking about what I need to make sure I highlight in next week's weekly update video, or sometimes I make, another video if I need to explain something a little bit more. Like I mentioned, students in my class are working on the theory to practice paper. So sometimes when we get to that first big paper, they've been working their way up to it with smaller papers and assignments, but sometimes I also make a special video just about that theory to practice paper. So that's something that I was working on too over the weekend. So Fridays are usually when I do that. Saturday's like a lighter day, Sunday's a maintenance day, and then Monday through Thursday, I'm just maintaining discussion board postings, posting as supplemental resources, just, keeping it going.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. But having a schedule has really helped tremendously. Other questions or comments or ideas?
Thank you also, Stephanie, for adding the resource to the Wakelet. That'll be great.
You're welcome. I'll get that in there right away.
Yeah, and to Tilt too, if you have that.
Yep.
I looked, but I'm not sure if it's there or not, so I don't want to assume. But if it is, that would be awesome.
I will be very happy to. I'm a big fan. And even if you just
Yeah,
take those 3 ideas away from the framework, the task, purpose, and criteria for success, it can make a
right.
big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. This has been really great and very informative. I think it gives us a lot of ideas for how we can be a little bit more reflective, but I love the overlay of the framework and the integration of those questions throughout. So thank you for providing that for us. So I am going to just pop a couple last minute links in the chat for everyone who would like to be able to access some resources. So you can get the full Open Ed Week schedule for our webinars at the first link. And there's the registration there. It is going to be the same room. So if you have the link, you can just come back here at 1 o'clock today or throughout the week as the schedule permits and join us there. We will be posting our recordings on our YouTube channel, and that's the bit.ly that you see. And then also lastly, Open Ed Global hosts SUNY online webinars on their website to an international audience. So that's really awesome for us and for our speakers. But they do have other activities going on around the globe. So if you're interested in the in-between times when we don't have something scheduled, feel free to take a look at the agenda and see what's happening that might be of interest to you. So again, thank you to Stephanie. Appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody for attending. We hope to see you at another event this week.